Okay, so let us begin, inshallah. So I've got a backup just in case. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala Habib Mustafa wa ala alihi wa ashabi wa ala martabal huda amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma 'allimna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. First of all, jazakumullah khair for taking your precious time out to attend this workshop. And it's probably one of the most important workshops for two reasons. Number one is because we're learning about the laws of zakat, which is one of the pillars of Islam. And which sequence does it come in? Is it the first, second, or third, or fourth pillar of Islam? Which one is it? Sorry? Third, exactly the third pillar of Islam. And its obligation is equal to the obligation of salah. So if anyone was to deny the obligation of zakat, then they don't become a Muslim. Like somebody who denies the obligation of salah, they're no longer a Muslim. So zakat, it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated upon the believers right from the beginning, even before migrations. Even before migration. But however, the detailed rules, the specific amount was not prescribed until after the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina. That's when the detailed laws of zakat were revealed. So just to mention that I have delivered this course in quite detail at our JK Fatawa as part of our JK Fatawa webinars, and it's uploaded onto YouTube channel, so I've discussed it in much detail. And what was interesting in that there was that it wasn't just a list of rules. We did a lot of case study exercises. So it's like you're in a proper class. So we teach you the rules, give you the examples, and we do a case study. So in that way, it keeps you more engaged. This, however, is a condensed version of the original workshop that I've delivered. Okay, because my time is very limited, because that one was about just over 2 to 3 hours. That's including the interaction and so on. Because my time is very limited here, so therefore, this is only a condensed version. If you want to know the detail, you can always go onto our JK Fatawa, our JK Institute website. So we'll take it from there. Now, this is obviously my profile. I have my own Twitter account. We have our JK Fatawa. You can reach out to me through the JK Fatawa email. That's where I work. I work at JK Institute. I'm a teacher at JK Institute, and in the mornings I'm at the Darul Ifta. So because I've been dealing with this case for so many years, alhamdulillah, so I've tried to bring together, synthesize for you the simplified guide, simplified step-by-step case of how to calculate zakat, and to address one of the most common questions that people ask. So simplify it for you. There's some case study exercises at the end. If you want to engage with them, that's fine. If anybody's got any questions, that's fine. In regards to the sisters, I'm not sure what arrangement there is, but whether you can speak through the mic or whether you're going to pass a note, either way, inshallah, we will accommodate that. So let us begin. So basically, this is the content. So this is the content, but again, this is just a very brief step-by-step process. This was the original content that I covered. However, some of them I'm not going to be discussing in this session because of the lack of time. But again, all of this is discussed in much detail, and this video is available on our website. So first of all, let us begin by what is zakat. So zakat literally means, it literally means purity, flourishing, and increase. What that basically means is that what zakat actually does, it purifies a person's wealth. So if, for example, if there's any wealth, as long as it's a halal income, okay, right? But if that wealth has somehow been contaminated through doubtful source or through unlawful source, the earning itself is halal, that's fine. But there may be certain times that where in our day-to-day transaction, there might be possibility that some of our wealth may be contaminated, for example. Then by zakat, by giving zakat, it purifies the entire wealth. Now this is different from giving zakat from calculating zakat on unlawful wealth. I'm going to discuss this anyway, that if someone's wealth is entirely unlawful and they know that the earning is haram, for example, and the entire income is haram, then there is no zakat on that, because zakat is only from pure wealth. The earning has to be halal, because first of all, that person's whole entire income is not permissible to begin with. If it's not permissible to begin with, how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept charity from that? So what that person needs to do is, he has to give all that wealth into, dispose of it by giving it to the most needy people without the intention of reward, and they have to change their occupation so that they can earn halal. As simple as that. But here, what we're talking about purifying, is that by giving zakat, it purifies one's entire wealth, which is halal, and making it pleasing to Almighty Allah. Also, flourish and increase. It can also mean literally flourish and increase, is because that when you give zakat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases the barakah in the wealth. And technically, so that's the literal meaning. So technical meaning is transferring ownership of that portion of wealth which the Sharia has stipulated for a poor, non-Hashmi, or non-servant Muslim, seizing all benefits in every aspect from owners. And so basically what that means, in a nutshell, that zakat literally means, number one is that your wealth, the Shari'i mal, the wealth that you have, giving up a portion of that wealth, which is 2.5%. Giving up a portion of that wealth, 2.5%, to the poor people. So what you're doing is you're taking that out of your ownership and you're giving it to the poor person. Someone who is poor. Number two is non-Hashmi. Non-Hashmi, because Hashmis are those that who are from the family of who are from the Banu Hashim, which is one of the sub-tribes of the Quraysh, and the Prophet ﷺ was from the Banu Hashim. And there's a lot of detailed discussions on that. And neither to his own servant, and by cutting off, by severing all benefit from the owner for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we're giving zakat, we're taking 2.5% of our wealth, we're giving it with the intention that we give, this is our zakat money for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving it to the poor and the destitute and those who are rightful recipients of zakat. Why? Is because by doing so, you're sharing your wealth with the poor, and the poor, they have a right they have a right for ownership in your wealth, they have a right in your own wealth, which is 2.5%. And when you're giving it for the sake of Allah, because that intention makes an ibadat. So one is just giving charity to a normal person without no intention, that's just welfare. But what makes an ibadat is the intention. So that's why intention is necessary. Is that clear to everyone so far? Is it easy to follow? Now I'm just going to continue. If there's any part that's difficult to understand, please do stop me. I will then repeat myself, okay? Because zakat is a very technical topic, so I want to try to make it as simple as possible. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu to Yemen as a governor, and amongst his instructions included, teach them what Allah Ta'ala has obligated charity, teach them that Allah Ta'ala has obligated charity on them in their wealth, taken from their rich and given to their poor. Now this is a hadith al-Bukhari. Basically what it means is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, towards the end part of his life, he had dispatched a great companion, a knowledgeable companion by the name of Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu to Yemen as a governor. And he sent him not just as a governor but also as a teacher. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving some guiding instructions, what to do. And one of the instructions that he gave was that you're going to encounter the Ahli Kitabs. You encounter the Ahli Kitabs, you give them da'wah to Shahadatu la ilaha illallah. If they accept, once they've accepted, then you teach them about Salah. And then after they have embraced that, then you teach them about charity. So this is like an extract from the lengthy hadith. Just as a side note, what we understand from Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu's narration is that when we give da'wah step by step. Okay? We have to give da'wah step by step. So because when a person just newly become a Muslim and you start obligating everything on them, it could be very overwhelming. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching him step by step. Give them da'wah first of shahada. Once they've given shahada, once they've embraced that, then teach them about salah. Once they become punctual on the salah, and now they're able to pray the salah, then teach them about zakat, then teach them about fasting, then teaching about hajj, and so on and so forth. So when we're giving da'wah to people, right, especially to a new Muslim, then we have to take it easy. We have to do it in a gradual process, and not to, like some people say, okay, this is halal, this is haram, you can't do this, you can't do that. It makes it more difficult for them. Anyways, So the point to mention here is that the Prophet ﷺ said that teach them about zakat. Now the second question is the prerequisites of zakat, meaning the conditions and the integrities of zakat. So we know what the definition of zakat is. We know from obviously the Quran makes it very clear of zakat is compulsory, and the prophetic narration hadith. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made zakat compulsory, there are certain conditions. So does that mean zakat is wajib upon every single person? It depends. There are certain conditions related to the individual. There are certain conditions related to the asset itself. And that's what we here intend to discuss. So here, if you look at it, he summarizes everything. So there's something called the sharaid, there's something called sabab, and there's something called rukan. I'll just simplify the way. Sharaid basically means the prerequisites, the preconditions for zakat, those conditions which are necessary before zakat applies. Now, like for example, salah. You have preconditions, which means that before salah is compulsory, before salat is necessary, number one is the time. You have to be on the right time, your body needs to be clean, the clothes needs to be clean, you need to minister wudu, and so on and so forth. So those are conditions before the ibadat. Sharait means conditions before zakat. So for example, you have to be Muslim, sane, mature, an owner, and have ownership of the wealth. So you have to be a Muslim, for example, you have to be baligh, you have to be mature, which means baligh, because if a child has money in his savings account, for example, and is not baligh, then there's no zakat on that. Okay, depending on who's the owner of that wealth, obviously. So if, for example, if a non-baligh child has personal ownership of certain wealth, then there's no zakat on that. He has to be baligh. Obviously, he has to be Muslim, because if a kafir, if he's a millionaire, but if he's non-Muslim, there's no zakat on him, right? And free, obviously, that was used those in the days of slavery, but that doesn't apply in this day and age. And ownership, you need to have full ownership of that wealth. So when you're giving zakat, I know this is a water bottle, obviously, but I'm just giving an example. So if this is a particular asset of wealth, okay, right? This needs to belong to you. So if, for example, let's say, if somebody gave this asset to you as safekeeping, so you don't need to give zakat on that, because that's not yours. Zakat is obligatory upon the one who owns this wealth. We'll go into the details later on. Then you have something called a sabab. Sabab basically means it's like a cause, a pathway, a doorway to the ibadat. So for example, for salah, the timings of salah is the doorway, right? So for example, now because the dhuhr, you can't read asr now because asr time was not set in yet. Okay? Asr salah was not set in yet. So sabab is like the doorway to the ibadat. So the assets reaching to the specific nisab, quantum level. So in other words, that once you have wealth, then it depends on the threshold amount that you have. So there's a certain threshold that one needs to possess for zakat to be obligatory. So for example, if you have £100 saving, if you have £100 saving, there's no zakat on that. If you have £200 saving, there's no zakat on that. So just by having wealth itself is not zakatable, but you have to reach to a certain minimum threshold, what we call nisab, in order for zakat to be necessary. That is the sabab, right? What is the modern calculation? I'll go through all of that shortly. And lastly is the rukan. Rukan is tamleek. Tamleek basically means, it's a technical term, that one is milkiyat and one is tamleek. Don't get confused with the two. Milkiyat means you have ownership of your own wealth. So this is my wealth, for example. If I want to give zakat on this, then I have to own this, right? That's called milkiyat, personal ownership of wealth. Tamleek means giving a portion, right? A portion of the wealth, ownership, giving ownership of a portion of your wealth, 2.5% to the poor person, to the poor individual. That's what you call tamleek. And there's a lot of ahkams and rulings related to this. So one of the essential conditions of zakat is that when you're going to give a portion, 2.5% of your wealth to the poor person, they have to have complete individual ownership. So therefore, zakat cannot be given to those organizations where there's no individual ownership. Okay, so we'll discuss that shortly. But just to understand the basic principles, tamleek, transfer of complete individual ownership to the individual. Okay, so this is just like some Arabic terms. Obviously, this was suggested to students. I'll skip this slide, but I do discuss this in the next slide in detail. Now, you see this colorful diagram here, that I go into the details of each individual. So when it comes to the conditions of zakat, they can be summarized as follows. Number one is complete ownership. We're talking about the red one first, okay? Is there a laser on this? Do we have a laser on this? No laser? Okay, that's fine. So, obviously, so let's look at okay, I've color coded it anyway. So look at the top green one. The top green one, which means complete ownership, which is a combination of tamleek and yad. Basically what that means is physical ownership and your personal ownership. So this wealth belongs to you as in your physical ownership. So for example, let's say 10,000 pounds, I lent it to this individual brother here. So that money belongs to me, but is it in my possession? No, it isn't. Yes? No, it isn't. You've borrowed it, and now you need to give that back to me. Okay? There are separate rules related to that. Giving zakat on the money that you've lent somebody. So what happens is that you've got partial ownership. You know that this individual, this brother here, for example, you've lent him money, 10,000 pounds, for example, and I know that he's going to give it back to me. So I don't need to give zakat yet until I get the whole full amount. Unless he pays me an installment, then that's a different matter. Okay? So complete ownership is a combination of ownership, which means the wealth belongs to you, and physical ownership, which means it's in your possession. So the creditor must pay his zakat loan to someone. Zakat on dowry is not necessary until qabd is attained due to the absence of yad. So basically, mahar, for example, inheritance money, for example, or the money that you've lent to somebody that you need to, you've lent someone, you're the creditor, you've lent somebody money. So lending money to somebody else, for example. So in all these instances, zakat becomes necessary as soon as you take possession of that wealth. So let's say, for example, a woman, let's say that she has just got married. Let's say Fatima got married to Zayd. Zayd has promised her that your mahar is 5,000 pounds. But he pays her after 3 years. After 3 years. Now, she does not need to give zakat in the previous years until she takes possession, physical possession of that 5,000 pounds mahar. And then once she takes possession and then the other conditions fulfill, then she gives zakat on that. Okay? I hope that's clear. So complete ownership. Number 2 is complete nisab. Nisab is what we call the threshold level. So the nisab of gold, for example, is 7.5 tolas, which is 87.48 grams, and the silver is 52.5, which is 612.36. I'm going to emphasize more on the grams because nowadays not many people are familiar with tolas. So just to remember the nisab, that nisab is the threshold for, we go by gold and silver. Even when it comes to calculating cash, the value of cash, and determine the nisab, we go by gold and silver. Primarily silver value. I'll discuss that. What's the modern nisab rate now? I'll explain that. So the nisab of gold is 87.48 and silver is 612.36. So the nisab for cash and commercial assets are measured by the value of silver. Many of the ulamas have given a fatwa that now when it comes to money or commercial assets, when it comes to calculating zakat, we go by the silver value. Number 3 is lunar year. If you look at the orange box, it is the lunar year. So elapsing of 1 year on zakatable assets from the first time one becomes sahib nisab. So in other words, so in short what this is saying is that when it comes to calculating zakat, one of the conditions is that a whole year has to elapse on that. Now what does it mean by whole year? It doesn't necessarily mean that I've got this wealth here and this has to stay with me within a whole year. But what it means that, whenever your zakat is calculated, so let's take a simple example first of Ramadan. So any examples I'm going to give first of Ramadan. So let's assume that your zakat anniversary is the first of Ramadan every single year. Okay, let's assume that. It doesn't have to be the case. It could be different. It could be different for individuals. But just for ease, let's go by first of Ramadan. So first of Ramadan is your zakat set date. Annual zakat set date. That this is the time that where your zakat is due and you have to give zakat on that. Okay. So now what it means is that by the time that it comes to first of Ramadan, whatever wealth that you have in your savings, right? Even if that money that you're saving up for future, you still need to pay zakat on that. You calculate zakat on that. Okay. That's what it means, technical terms. So let's say you had 5,000 pounds. Just 2 days before, let's say 2 days before Ramadan, you had an addition 1,000 pounds. Like 5,000 pounds and you had an addition 2,000 pounds. Just a few days before. That's now going to be included, 7,000 pounds, that's going to be included within the zakatable asset. Okay? And the easiest method that I tell people, because now many people we pay zakat in thousands, right? So every 1,000 is 25 pounds. Okay? If you have 5,000 pounds, 25 pounds per 1,000, okay, right? So that's 125 basically, isn't it? 125 pounds is zakat, etc. But if you got let's say 5,000 or 500 or something like that, then 2.5% of 500. Okay, so every 100 is £2.50 basically. Anyways, so we'll go into the details of that shortly. Anyways, so the lunar year elapsing 1 year zakatable asset from the first time one became sahib nisab. And this is the reason why, is because of productivity. This is where the scholars go into the details. I'll skip all that for now. Number 4, which is the red box, is addition to one's basic essentials. Now this is the key thing here, that when it comes to calculating zakat, it's not on any asset, but is referring to those assets which are beyond your needs. So for example, when you have like cooking utensils, fridge, gas cookers and things like that, there's no zakat in there because they're part of our day-to-day essentials. Or likewise, let's say if you have money which is within the nisab rate but is part of your need because you need to pay bills, for example, or you have a mortgage, for example, these kind of things, etc. Okay, right? Those expenses that which are your daily expenses or essential expenses, then there's no zakat on them. This is on the savings, even if those savings are for future. So for example, people sometimes ask that I'm saving money for my daughter's wedding, or I'm saving money to put a deposit in a house, but that's not immediate, but that's going to be future. You still need to pay zakat on that. Once it's going to be used within that year, then there's no zakat on it at all. So he has to be beyond, says, possessing wealth equal or more than the nisab beyond essentials, extra savings, for example. This excludes items or money that fall within one's personal needs, without which constraint is the likelihood outcome, like household, cooking utensils, bills, etc. Okay, so that's the key thing to remember. Those money and those assets that are within your essentials, there's no zakat on them. Okay, those are beyond your essentials. They're just like savings, for example, then there's zakat on that. Then you have productive wealth. Productive wealth basically means that the wealth needs to be that which generates income. Yes? So not just like assets. So for example, I've got a table here. It's a nice table, mashallah, right? Let's say a table. So if let's say I have like 100 tables and they're not being used, but they're 100 tables. But at the same time, I'm not renting them out, nothing. I'm not gaining any income of these tables. Do you need to pay zakat on that? No, you don't. There's no zakat on those. So he's talking about productive wealth, which means is that those wealth or assets that are used where you can generate income. So for example, cash, gold, silver, or you have like property businesses, you're buying and selling properties, you're renting out properties, for example, buying, selling cars, buying, selling phones, okay? They become zakatable assets, otherwise not. And finally, debt-free, the blue box. Debt-free, all such liabilities incurred by another servant, for instant debt, dowry and transaction. Basically, you're debt-free. So in other words, that the wealth that you have is debt-free. You don't owe anybody money. Okay? Technically, such money falls under the essential needs, and the debtor does not own the money upon the creditor's demand. So basically, because when you borrow money, and now there's a slight difference in this. There's this long-term and short-term debt now, masla. I'll discuss that inshallah. I have a diagram. But this is basically taken from the general books of fiqh, because there was no distinction of short-term and long-term debt. This is a new masala that's just been introduced. Okay, I'll explain that shortly. Okay, but just to remember here though, is that those wealth that which do not belong to you, right? You are in a debt, for example, then there is no zakat on that. So for example, if I owe mahar to my dowry to my wife, for example, or other things, there's no zakat on that, because the one who the money belongs to, they become responsible for zakat. Okay.
Question, please. Just
Yeah.
clarification on the last, the green bit. Say, for example, someone, you give qard al-hasana to someone. Are you saying that we don't have to give zakat on that money because technically we don't own that yet? Someone else is owning it.
Okay, I have a whole slide on that about short-term, long-term, so I'll come to that question, okay, right? This is just like the conditions, but I'm going to go into details each one, okay? So just say that question, inshallah, okay? So basically, qard al-hasana, you lent the money to someone, yes? So you lent somebody, give me a figure, for example.
10 grand.
10 grand, okay, let's 10 grand, okay? 10 grand for Ramadan makes it easy, okay? So 10,000 pounds, you lent somebody's qard al-hasana. So does that mean then, do you need to give, so you're the creditor then, aren't you? So obviously you need to pay zakat on it anyway, right? But this is the question of whether the debtor, the one who's borrowed the money, does he pay zakat on that money also? Right? That's the question. So we'll come to that, okay? So there's two aspects. One is zakat on the creditor and one is zakat on the debtor. So I've kind of divided that. So inshallah I'll discuss that, okay? So let's first go into step-by-step process, zakatable assets. So how do you determine zakatable nisab assets? Gold, silver, cash, trading stocks, etc. Okay? Now, I've excluded trading stock from here is because that's a very detailed masala, but you can apply the same principles. Well, I would suggest that, I forgot to mention this disclaimer, that because I'm going through the basic step-by-step process, if you have a particular case, you can always email us. You can go through our JKN Fatawa department website, jknfatawa.com. We have loads of zakat masail that I've already answered on the website. You can go into the details of that. If any of the questions are not answered, you can reach out to me there, okay? Because we are getting a lot of zakat queries now, so you can by all means send us your query through our JKN Fatawa website, all right? But otherwise, we have plenty of queries answered there. You can just refer to them. Now, step-by-step process. Simple. There are 3 basic steps. Number 1 is identify your zakatable assets. So first is identify your zakatable assets. Number 2, deduct all essentials, liabilities, and short-term loans. I mentioned short-term loans, okay? I'll discuss that shortly, what that means, okay? So deduct all essentials, liabilities, meaning bills, etc., and short-term loans within that year. You deduct all of that. So there's this term that I'm going to be using, deductible, non-deductible. Please understand what that means. Deductible, you know what deductible means, don't you? Yes? Taken away, right? When I use the term deductible, what that means is that that's excluded from zakat calculation. So let's say here's the wealth. I've got wealth here, okay, right? Now, when I say deductible, so let's say this part of the wealth is part of my debt, for example, okay? I owe somebody money, it's a short-term debt, or my bills, etc., okay, right? So that is deductible. That means that's excluded from zakat calculation. I only calculate zakat on this. And when I use the term non-deductible, what does that mean? It's included. Yes? So that means that will be part of the zakat calculation. So I will have to calculate zakat on all of these wealths. Is that clear? So just understand these terms. Deductible means excluded. Non-deductible means included. Simple as that. So it says here step 2 means deduct all essentials, liabilities on short-term loans. They're not included in zakat. And then number 3, once you got that, calculate the net zakat on the zakatable assets at the end of the lunar year. In our cases, first of Ramadan. Is that understood? So this is the simple step-by-step process when it comes to calculating zakat. Now let's go into the details of each one. Now this is where we go into the nisab. Now gold, silver, cash and mixed assets. Now let me give you a brief what this means. So when it comes to gold, the Sharia has already stipulated the nisab of zakat. Okay, right? Which was now we're going to get a bit technical here, right? First of all, how do we come to these? 87.48, 612.36, right? How do we come to these figures to begin with, right? Now, first thing to remember is that in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was something called dinar and dirham, okay? There was dinar and there was dirham. Dinar and dirham were the prevalent currencies at the time, and the Prophet ﷺ himself stipulated the nisab. He is the one that stipulated that this is the nisab. So for example, for the dinar, which is the gold coin, the Prophet ﷺ stipulated 20 dinars. So the Prophet ﷺ said that anyone who has 20 dinars gold coin, then zakat becomes necessary of 2.5% of that, okay? And when it comes to silver coins, which is dirham, the Prophet ﷺ stipulated 200 dirhams. 200 dirhams. So if anybody was to have 200 dirhams, on 200 dirhams, they will have to give 2.5% of that. Is that clear? Now, how is this calculated? So just to remember that one dirham is equivalent to today, in today's currency, 3.061 grams. So one silver coin is equivalent to 3.061 grams. Is that clear? And gold is equivalent to, by the way, this has been recorded, isn't it? Yeah? It's been recorded? That's perfect. So you can remember, you can go back to this, okay? So how is this? How do we calculate dirham into modern day calculations? So how do we convert it? So how do we convert to modern day calculation? So one silver coin is equivalent to in today's value, 3.061 gram of silver. Okay, 3.06 grams of silver. And one gold dinar is equivalent to 4.375. 4.375. So if you multiply the figures, this is what you get. Yes? So if you were to multiply 4.375 times 20 dinar, 20 dinar, this is the figure that you get, 87.48 grams. And if you were to multiply 3.061 grams of silver to 200 dirhams, this is the figure that you get, 612.36. So is that clear? So this is how the ulamas have calculated, have converted classical dirham, dinar, dirham to modern gold and silver. It's as simple as that. So when it comes to Mahr Fatimi, for example, Mahr Fatimi, rather than going through the process of the tolas and mashas and this and that, the easiest way I say, okay, what was the dirhams? What was the Mahr Fatimi in dirham in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Then calculate each dirham. If one dirham is equivalent to 3.061, multiply that by the total amount of dirham, that gives you the figure. Right? But now the question is, silver grams, how do we convert that into money? I already have a slide on that. I'll explain that to you, okay? Now, 87.48 grams of gold and silver is 636. Cash is gold, but you can calculate it by gold or silver. Now, the reason why I say gold and silver is because there is an opinion amongst the ulamas, but it's a minority opinion, that some scholars, they say that we should calculate the nisab of cash by gold value, not silver value. The majority practice is silver value. This is the fatwa we give. But many people go by the gold value. And there are reasons for that. And one of the main reasons is so that we can distribute zakat in this country. But in any case, that's a separate matter. When it comes to mixed assets, in other words, trading stocks. You've got a bit of cash, you've got a bit of gold, you've got a bit of silver, you've got a bit of trading stocks and so on. So how do you calculate zakat? You can go by either gold or silver value. Now, move on to the next slide, is zakatable assets and non-zakatable assets. So zakatable assets divided into two, which are cash, gold, silver, trading stocks, personal benefits, business stocks, animal stocks, agricultural lands, all are zakatable. Non-zakatable assets, property, meaning your own property, personal property, household utensils, appliances, vehicles, clothes, diamonds, jewels, pearls, metals, etc. All these are non-zakatable. So if you've got diamonds, if you've got phones, if you've got, not jewelry, talk about jewels, rubies for example, okay, right? Or pearls, or vehicles that you use for personal use, they are non-zakatable. Even if you have about 4 or 5 vehicles, but they're not used for trading or nothing, there's no zakat in them. Is that understood? Is that clear so far? Okay, that's fine. Now, this is the most important slide here, where everybody's been waiting for. Oops, where's it gone? So the current nisab of cash. Now, I actually checked this yesterday. So this is the up-to-date calculation which I had used in the previous session. So obviously on the YouTube, because this slide is on YouTube, it gives you a different figure because that was the figure that was calculated last year. So this is the up-to-date figure now. So if somebody wants to know that what's the current nisab in cash, this is it. So when it comes to cash, depending upon which value that you go by. So we go by majority silver. So if you look at gold value, 1 gram of gold today, the value is £51 and 65 pence. So 1 gram of gold is equivalent to £51 65 pence. So if you were to now calculate that, if you want to calculate the nisab of cash in terms of gold value, is 87.48 times 51.65 equals to £4,518 and 34 pence. So if anybody goes by and follows the view of gold's of the nisab rate according to the gold value, this is the nisab, which means if you possess savings or money less than that, there's no zakat on you. Okay. Now, if measured by silver value, then the current rate of silver gram is 57 pence. And I'm kind of surprised because this has not changed. This was same last year, 57 pence. Right, 56 or 57, but gold has changed significantly because last year gold was about £48 or £49. Now it's gone to £51 65 pence. But silver has stayed the same, only 1 pence difference. So the current value of silver is 57 pence per gram. So 612.36 equals to £349 and 4 pence. This is now the current nisab of cash. So if you have cash savings equal or more to this, then zakat is compulsory upon you. Less than that, then so if you go about £300, let's say, there's no zakat on you. Is that clear so far? So this is the current. So this is the main figure we need to remember. Majority of the scholars rule by the silver value. So you need to remember now. So we need to remember now, because this is the same as last year, right? There's only 1 pence difference. So this is the likelihood this will be the likelihood nisab threshold for this Ramadan. So £349 and 4 pence. Or you can round it up by £350, even then that's fine, it's okay, no problem. Okay, having said that, now important note about gold and silver. Number one is that anything that falls under gold and silver value, okay, will be zakatable. So anything falls under gold and silver will become zakatable. So anything fulfills the hukam and the ruling of gold and silver, right, even if it's mixed with other things, if majority is gold, majority is silver, it falls in the rule of zakat, is zakatable. Number two, all jewelries, whether used or not used, are zakatable upon reaching the required nisab. Now there are differences in the schools of thought, that when you have jewelry, is zakat necessary upon them or not. Now in the Shafi'i madhab, as well as the other madhabs, that if a woman, if she wears gold even once a year, then they're not zakatable. Why? Because they fall under her, they fall part of her essential needs like clothes. But in the Hanafi madhab, on the other hand, we say that regardless if she wears the jewelry or not, she has to calculate zakat. And we have a clear hadith on this. Where the Prophet ﷺ once, there was a woman that came to visit the Prophet ﷺ, and she brought her daughter. And her daughter had 2 bangles. They were big, thick bangles. So the Prophet ﷺ said that, have you given zakat on this? So then she said, Messenger of Allah, no. And the Prophet ﷺ said that, would it please you that these bangles are heated by the fire of Jahannam and they placed onto your wrist? So she said, Messenger of Allah, no. And then she took those bangles, removed it, and she gave it in the path of Allah. So the Hanafi madhab have used this hadith to justify that they've used this hadith to justify that zakat is necessary on jewelries. Now, if someone has gold, I forgot to add that. Yeah. Now, if someone has gold and silver, but both below the nisab, then they must be combined. If they reach the equivalent to the silver value, then zakat, it will be calculated. So if you have a bit of mixture of both. So let's say, for example, if you have about, let's say if you have, about 500 grams of silver. Now, is there zakat on 500 grams of silver? If you have 500 grams of silver, is there zakat on it? So what was the nisab? Okay, so if you have 500, is there zakat on it? No, there isn't, because it's below the nisab level. And is there zakat on 10 grams of gold? 10 grams of gold. Sorry? No, it isn't, because the nisab was 87.48, right? But let's say individually, no, but what if you combine them together? If you combine them together...
So can I ask one question?
Okay.
If you have a freehold property, do I need to pay zakat?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Freehold property, loan paid, I have freehold property, do I need to pay zakat?
Freehold property?
Yeah.
Okay, are you selling that property? Are you selling it?
No, I'm not
Okay.
selling it.
Have you put it on rent?
Yes.
You put it on rent? Okay, so that was the question. So the revenue they get through rent, you have to pay zakat on that. Yeah. Okay, so there's 2 things. One is you're buying and selling property. So if you're buying and selling property, you calculate zakat on the market value. Yes? Because that it becomes a zakatable asset. But if you just rented out a property, right, then the rent that you receive, right, you pay zakat on that provided it fulfills the other conditions.
I find very difficult to calculate money, the money coming.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's a good thing. So again, I go through the step by step. So I give a general advice at the end. So the easiest way, the simplest advice I give to people, now because money fluctuates during the year, it doesn't matter. The Hanafi madhab, the way they calculate zakat is very easy. That don't worry about the fluctuation. Look at and what was the nisab, what was the zakat date that we set? First of Ramadan, isn't it? Yes? Hypothetically. So first of Ramadan, wherever you've got in your savings, rent or whatever, you pay zakat on that.
I think this is the easy way.
That's the easiest way.
How much I have, first of Ramadan, how much I have.
Yeah. So because money can fluctuate, as long as you've got money in your saving, now remember it's an important question. As long as you've got money, as long as you've got savings in your account, so even if it fluctuates, for example, bills and this and that, etc., it doesn't matter. So that's what the ulama, the Hanafi fuqahas, they say that don't worry about the fluctuation. As long as there's still money in your bank account, right towards the end of your your zakat due date, whatever money that you have, whatever savings you have now in there, you calculate zakat on that. Yeah, I'm gonna discuss that. That's what I'm saying. I'm addressing it step by step. Okay. So if you borrow money, do you give zakat on that? I'm gonna address all of that. Okay.
Sir, another question. Current account. I will count the current. Zakat, I have looked at the zakat my current account.
Current account. Okay. I have a slide on that.
Coming, going, step by what I will calculate first of all, the amount was there.
Yeah, that's it. So that's the basic, because it goes back to the same point I was mentioning. You know your zakat, because money fluctuates, comes and goes. So don't worry about that. Just wherever, because if you were to keep an eye on every single money that's in your account, it's going to become difficult. So the easiest way is, first of Ramadan, your zakat due date, how much money have you got? Even if you received extra money a day before, that's included in your zakat. But after the first, you don't need to do that for the following year. This is the easiest way. Yeah? Easiest way, okay? And I have a lot of questions. I guarantee you, every place that I've dealt with zakat, they've asked this question. Honestly, you're not the only ones. Everywhere. I went in Batley last year before Ramadan. I did a zakat, and somebody asked the same question. Exactly the same. Property as well. Yeah? So I said, don't worry about it. It just makes it so easy. Anyways, we're going to get caught up in the discussion, okay? Now, let's go into gold. Now, a lot of people ask this question about gold, right? And this is mainly specific for the women, because sometimes you have like different carats of gold, 9 carat gold and this and that, etc. Oh, sorry, yeah. My mistake. Sorry for reminding me. So basically, right, so if you have, so what was the examples again? So you have 500 grams of silver and you have 10 grams of gold. Now, individually, there's no zakat on them because they're below the nisab threshold, isn't it? So what do you have to do now? You have to mix them together. Mix them together because we go by the silver value. So if the value of that equals to the value of 612.36 or more, then you calculate zakat on that, which most likely case it will be. Yes? So we calculate the cash value, the value of according to silver, which was 57 pence, wasn't it? 57 pence, which is now 350. So by mixing them both together, if they equal to 350 pounds or more, which is likelihood the case, then you calculate zakat on it now. Is that understood? So that's simple. So mixed assets. Okay, now a lot of questions that people ask, and this is mainly for the sisters. There's sisters listening out there, right? This is about gold. Now what happens is when they wear gold, sometimes some are pure gold, some are not pure gold. And they mix out their carats. So I have a separate slide on talking about the different carats, like 8 carat gold, 22, 24 carat gold, okay, right? So you have starts with 6 carat gold, 8, and etc. and so on. Now, there has been a lot of discussion on this, but let's just look at the principle first. So mixed metals. If you look at the traditional Hanafi madhab, the traditional understanding of the Hanafi fiqh is that the standard rule is that if you have silver or you have gold, if they are mixed with other substances, then the ruling will be based on the majority. So if in those days, for example, you have silver coins, but what happened to those silver coins, it was mixed with other metals like copper, iron and things like that, okay, right? So what the scholars said, that if this silver coin, right, if it's mixed with other metals and majority of it constitutes other substances and very less silver, then the ruling will not be based on silver. Okay? It won't be based on silver. But if majority of it is silver and the minority of it is of other substances, then it will be ruled as silver. So when you have silver or gold mixed with other metals, what would you treat it as? Gold or silver? So you go by the majority. If majority of the substance is either gold or silver, they'll be treated as gold. And then the rules of gold or silver will apply. But if majority of it is other substances and less gold and less silver, like 10% gold, 10% silver, 90% is other metals, then it'll be treated as other metals. The rules of gold and silver will not apply. Is that clear? That's a simple rule. So majority is gold or silver, a majority is made of other substances. So the traditional Hanafi madhab method is zakatable on the entire gold and silver. So even though let's say 80% is gold, 80% is silver, and the other 20% is other point, then you calculate zakat, treat it as gold and silver, and you calculate zakat on that, right? But if majority is made up of other substances, non-zakatable, and will be treated as other metals. This is the traditional method. Now, you may find another fatwa There may be other scholars, other muftis may give a different fatwa. Well, they will simply say that if you have gold, if a woman has gold, for example, mixed with other metals, then what she needs to do, she needs to then calculate the percentage, she calculate the percentage or the grams weight of the gold and calculate zakat on that. So if, for example, let's say, if she has gold that's 50% gold, 50% other metal, right? So what they will do, some muftis that will give the fatwa, that if it's a particular gram, so whatever grams it weighs, then calculate the gram of the gold part and give zakat on that, not the other metal part. But my understanding is that this sometimes overcomplicates it. It kind of overcomplicates it. So we tend to follow the simple fatwa that go by the traditional method, that go by the majority. Majority gold, treat it as whole gold. Majority silver, treat it as majority silver, and not vice versa. It's as simple. And this makes it more easy for people to calculate. And if you look at the next slide, this is basically the carat. And I've taken this from UK bullion, right? So you look at 6, so for example, you got 6 carat gold. So if you look here, 6 carat gold, the hallmark is 20, so it's only 25% pure gold, which means 75% is not gold. But if you look at 14 onwards, so this is what we need to look at. So looking at this masala principle, between 6 carat gold and 12 carat gold, right, you don't need to treat it as gold. So if a woman wears jewelry, right, that is between 6 to 12 carat gold, from a traditional masala point of view, she doesn't need to calculate zakat. Why? Because it has to be majority. You need to be concerned about between 14 to 24. Once it hits 14 to 24, that's when it will be treated as majority and you calculate zakat on that. And this is probably the most easiest, the most safest way. Understood? And just as a disclaimer, other muftis will give a different fatwa, and that's also a valid fatwa. But I think nowadays what people do is, well, women, what they do, they go to a goldsmith and then they calculate zakat for them. So depending on what they follow, which view that they follow, if they are trusted people and they usually get the advice from the ulamas and they calculate zakat for, because they know how to calculate zakat, you can even go by their method. So if they say to you, your zakat is this much, you can even go by you can go by what they set for you, provided that they are trustworthy. You can even do that as well, that's permissible. Right, okay. So the next slide now is about gold, silver, pensions. I think we've already covered this, so again, this is just like a repetition, but we'll just skip this. But one thing to note about pensions, I have a detailed article on this on our JK Fatwa website. Okay, if anybody wants to know more detail about how to calculate zakat and pension, you could refer to my article. But just to mention here, though, state pension and personal pension are zakatable upon receiving the funds during the retirement. Zakat and previous is not necessary. So simple term that when people ask about pensions, if you know you're going to get pensions, you are not required to pay zakat on it now, not until you receive your pension. So once you receive your pension, you can't get zakat on it. I go into the details of different categories and so on. There's other like personal pensions, like for example, people trading stocks and things like that. I can't remember the term now, but there's that. So I talk about that in detail. So workplace pension is similar to weak debt, in which case zakat becomes applicable when receiving the funds during retirement. So just to clearly remember that when do zakat become necessary upon pension? Once you receive them upon retirement. And by the way, do you guys want a break or anything? You guys want like a break or anything? Or are you sure? Because there's quite a lot to cover. Okay, now trading stock, I'll just briefly summarize this. So when it comes to business assets, there are 3 essential conditions to take in consideration. One is the niyyah. So for example, let's take an example. Let's say phones, mobile phone, okay, right? I want to get into mobile phones, buying and selling mobile phones, okay? So how do I calculate? So would zakat be compulsory upon them? So there's a few things. Number one is, you have the intention to trade the merchandise. So I have a phone shop, and now I'm engaged in the business of buying and selling phones. So whenever I receive new stock, I sell it. Okay? That's the intention. So you make the intention that this phone is going to be for selling because I'm purchasing from the wholesaler to sell it. Number 2, amal, the actual selling of the item purchased to resell, as I mentioned. And number 3, the merchant taking possession over the stock before reselling. So you've taken possession over the stock, or you have some kind of ownership of that stock. So even if the stock is not in your hands, but it's in your control and you can now sell it if you want. Okay? these three conditions are fulfilled, then that asset becomes a tradable stock. So all these need to be fulfilled. Now finally, this is where a lot of the questions people ask about deductible, non-deductible liabilities, personal debt, debt credit, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's move on to this one. Now, liabilities. When it comes to personal loan, I remember I mentioned about long-term and short-term. Long-term and short-term debt. So this is where the discussion is, and I have a detailed fatwa on this. Now, if you look at the top here, it says personal and business liabilities. This is talking about debt here. So this is the case applying to the borrower now. You are the one that's in debt. So remember, this is not referring to the creditor. This is referring to the borrower, the one who is borrowing. So you have short-term liabilities or you have long-term liabilities. Now, there's a whole detailed discussion as to why. This is, by the way, just to mention, this is like a new fatwa, revised fatwa that the ulamas and scholars have presented. This does not represent the classical tradition per se, because in the classical tradition, right, it was clear that if you're in debt, that money doesn't belong to you, there's no zakat upon you, right? But the thing was, right, in those days, there were kind of punitive measures. There were punitive measures that if somebody did not pay, then there will be punitive measures, therefore they had to pay it. But in this day and age now, is that we have like long-term debts which are part of your liability, like mortgages and things like that, etc. So if somebody has a mortgage, whether it be a halal mortgage or haram mortgage, that disqualifies every person from paying zakat. So that's why this loan aspect had to be revised. Okay. So the way they've done it is that calculating zakat is of two ways. You look at short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities. How do you know what's short-term and long-term? Is within 12 months and beyond 12 months. So any debt that you need to pay within 12 months, right? Any debt that you need to pay within 12 months, then they are considered to be personal, then they're considered to be short-term liabilities. And what's the ruling? They are non-zakatable. As for long-term liabilities, they are referred to those that which you pay beyond 12 months, which is beyond years, like mortgages or long-term debt, for example. Or let's say, for instance, that you have like an agreement with a person that £10,000, and you're going to pay him over a period of, let's say, 10 years, £1,000 per year, for example, okay, right? So that would be considered long-term debt. What's the ruling? Non-zakatable. Those debts that which are paid within a year, they are deductible from zakat, which means you do not pay zakat on those assets. So if you have a debt, for example, so let's take the example of £10,000. You made an agreement with somebody that I will pay you over 10 years £1,000. He says fine. So every year you're paying £1,000. So what does that mean? Only £1,000 is going to be deducted from zakat. The other £9,000, they are going to be included within your zakat calculation. Okay? Because that's considered to be long-term debt. Likewise with mortgage. So there's a slide I've got here of how to calculate zakat and mortgage. I'll mention that, okay? Is that clear? And beyond 12 months, zakatable and cannot be deducted from the zakatable asset. So any money, say debts that you have beyond 12 months that you need to pay afterwards, like for example the case of £10,000, you pay £1,000 every year, but the £9,000 you can pay over the period of years, then they are not going to be deductible within that year. Each £1,000 will be deducted when you calculate your zakat every year. Is that understood? Good. Now, deductible liabilities. Now, the next slide is about deductible liabilities. So now, which are short term, what would you deduct? So I've simplified it for you here. Number one is outstanding. Outstanding, not future basic living expenses which have not yet been paid. For example, utility bills. They're all deductible, which means you don't pay zakat on them. Next is goods purchased on credit. Meaning you have taken a receipt of goods but not yet paid them and fully intend to pay the debt straight away. So now, for example, let's say you go to a grocery store, for example, and they put you on credit, for example, and you know that you owe that money to them, for instance, okay, right? Then that is deductible from your zakat. Okay, you don't need to pay zakat on that. Number three is outstanding salary. Outstanding salary payable, services, tuition fee, etc. So outstanding salary. So outstanding debt, for example, like tuition fee you need to pay within the year, for example, or for example madrasa fees, for example, they're all It says deductible. Now, unpaid dowry to one's, next one is unpaid dowry to one's wife. Assuming one intends to pay this during the year, then it too can be deducted. So if, for example, if a husband, if he decides that he's going to pay after 3 years, then he still needs to pay zakat on it. But if he makes the firm intention that he's going to pay it this year before Ramadan, then that's not going to be included. That in his zakat calculation, that will be deducted. Next is personal loans, as I mentioned. So it's the same rule. In some, you notice they're on the same rule, but I've kind of like divided it to make it easy for people. And finally, commercial loans. The entire loan cannot be deducted against assets, only 1 year's payment. Again, as I've already mentioned. Now, how to calculate zakat on mortgage? Now, the easiest way to remember is that mortgage, they're considered to be long-term debts. So how is it? It's simple. That only 1 year's of loan will be deducted and not the entire amount. So let me give you an example. A person has a loan of £100,000. You've taken a mortgage out of £100,000, right? Of a capital over 20 years. So every year he is paying £5,000. So let's say every year, let's say for example, I think he's paying about £500 a month or something like that, or £600 or whatever. It totals up to £5,000 a year. So then only 5,000 will be deducted for zakat and not the entire amount. Now why is that? It's because if somebody, let's say, is in £100,000, because they tell you, don't they, that this is your actual capital, £100,000. So if you were to include all of that as your debt, then that means there's no zakat on you. So for example, let's say for a woman, if she's got gold, she says, look, because I'm in £100,000 debt, okay, then there's no zakat. So nobody pays zakat then. You get the point now? That's the reason why. So my understanding is that, you know, the short-term and long-term debt has primarily been specified because of mortgage and other long-term debts are not being included. So that's mainly the reason why we have the short-term and long-term debt. So is that clear? So 5,000 will only be deducted, but not the entire, not the entire, which obviously now suggests 95,000. Okay, so the 95,000 will be included. Now, what about the interest? What about the interest? Is that deducted? The interest will not be deducted, as that is not considered a valid loan. Yes, because Islam obviously doesn't recognize interest, so that's not considered to be a valid loan. So that's not big. So in the above case, if he calculates that he will end up paying £150,000, then the £50,000 will not be deducted. Because, you know, in the mortgage, what they tell you that this is £100,000, but then they tell you that from this period, £50,000 is your interest. That is not going to be deducted, because Sharia, Islam does not recognize that as a valid debt, because it is haram to pay to begin with. Yeah? So is that clear? So this is the basic step. So once you've understood this, everything becomes clear. Now, receivable debt. Now, this one here, so the previous slide, so this slide here was about the borrower himself. So you're the one that's owing money. The next slide now is about the creditor. The creditor, which means now you are the one who's lent money. So let's say you lent £10,000, and the brother, mashallah, gave the example of a qarz hasana. So you're the creditor. You've lent somebody £10,000. Okay? So when does zakat become compulsory upon him then? So now, the ulamas and scholars state that when it comes to you, when it comes to people owing you money, right, there are different categories. So, because when people owe you money, that can come in different forms. Let's say you're an employee. Your employer owes you money, for example. Or let's say, for example, anyone a plumber? Anyone a plumber or electrician? So let's say, for example, you're a plumber, right? You went and did some work in somebody's house. Now they owe you, let's say, £600. Isn't it? So you provided the service, now they owe you money now, don't they? So you're like you're like the creditor. In other words, what this means is that somebody owes you money. So in these kind of examples, what do you do in this case? How does this plumber, for example, this electrician, how will he calculate his zakat of the money that he has, that's owed to him in hundreds or in thousands? So first of all, let's categorize the debts. How do the scholars categorize the debts? So there's something called a strong debt, there's something called a medial debt, and there's something called a weak debt. A strong debt basically is a loan due to trading in commercial goods to resell or loan money. So for example, let's say this is referring to, let's say, a business person. He's purchased mobile phones to resell. Now obviously the retailer owes the wholesaler money, doesn't he? He was a wholesaler money. So for example, he's bought, let's say, £20,000 worth of stock. So the retailer's purchased £20,000 worth of stock, for example, okay, with the intention to the retailer that he's going to resell. Okay, so now this is to do with the wholesaler now, isn't it? So this falls into strong debt. Okay, strong debt. Okay, so a loan due to trading in commercial goods to resell or loan money. So loan money, for example, qarz hasana that somebody mentioned. So the item received will be zakatable, and should it remain with the purchaser. So in other words, what it's saying is that money that's owed to you, they're all zakatable. That will be zakatable for a person. Zakat becomes payable on the previous years or 20% of the total amount of value. So what that means is that loan or that money that's owed to you, that will be zakatable, but that will be zakatable even on the previous years. So if it's a strong debt, so let's take an example of qarz hasana. You lent somebody £10,000 and they're going to pay you over a period of 10 years. So now the creditor, once he receives the amount, okay, once he receives the full amount of £10,000, then he'll have to pay zakat in the previous years. Okay, but if he's paying installments, so that was the case if he pays it all at once. But if he receives that in installments, then it's saying that once he receives 1/5 of that, so what's 1/5 of 10,000? 2,000, isn't it? 2,000. So once he receives 2,000, then he pays zakat on that. Okay, but in short, what he's trying to say, strong debt, if the creditor receives that money after a few years, then upon receiving it, he needs to pay zakat on the previous years. He needs to pay zakat of that on the previous years. Now, the easiest way, what I would suggest, is that whether you are receiving it in installments or whether you're going to receive the full amount after 10 years, for example, the easiest way is that calculate your zakat every single year of that £10,000 in advance. Is that clear? You don't have to do it in advance, but if you want to wait until after £10,000 and then you want to calculate zakat, then you can do that, then it's permissible.
So basically, somebody gives you lent somebody £10,000, they give you that £10,000, you can pay zakat on that then.
Yeah, you can pay zakat on that then.
Not if somebody's giving you £1,000 a year, you pay £1,000, you pay.
You can, yeah, you can do that as well, yeah. So it works out the same anyway. You can work out the same anyway, right? You can do either way. So either number one, if somebody was to pay you, so look at it this way. When you've lent somebody money, there's one or two scenarios. Either they paid you all at once, they said after 10 years I'm going to save up £1,000 and then I will give you the full £10,000 after 10 years, okay, right? So one scenario is that you get the full lump sum after 10 years, then what you need to do, you need to calculate zakat every single year. You need to pay zakat in the previous years. So not only on that year, but the previous 10 years you need to pay zakat on that as well, because that money was yours, wasn't it? Yes? Because that money is yours. Because you have ownership of that money. Is that clear? That's one scenario. Or the second scenario is the person that he pays you in installments. Yes? So what the masla is saying, that once you receive 1/5 of that £2,000, then you pay zakat on that £2,000. Right? That's basically £50. And then every time that you receive the zakat, then you pay that, and then that's it, it's done. But just to simplify things, if somebody wants to pay zakat every single year of that in advance, so he knows I'm going to get it in 10 years. So he decides, look, I want to pay my zakat now before I get it, even that is permissible, it's okay. Because that money is still his. Okay? It's just a question of, is it wajib for him to pay it straight away or not? Yes? It's wajib upon him to pay zakat on the previous years once he receives the amount. But if he was to pay in advance, that is permissible. Is that understood? Is that clear? Right, okay. Then you have mutawassit medial debt. Medial debt basically a loan that due to purchasing the personal goods such as household furniture, etc. So what this basically medial debt is, I'll just simplify because this goes into technicality, is let's say for example that you worked in somebody's house, right? You provided a service. So you're a plumber, for example, and you go to work into somebody's house that's worth £3,000. So you're doing £3,000 worth of work in their house. And they say to you, you know what, I'm in a bit of a financial crisis, inshallah I'll pay you after 1 year, 2 years. Okay, right? He says fine. So he does not need to pay zakat on the previous years. So let's say if he paid him after 2 years, for example, so he does not need to pay zakat on the previous 2 years. As soon as he gets that £3,000, then he'll pay zakat on that year. Is that understood? Is that clear? That's simple. And then finally is da'if. Da'if is weak debt. Weak debt basically is money that's given to you as a gift, for example, inheritance money, dowry, like a dowry, inheritance money, in khula, for example. Okay, all these are considered to be weak debt. Pensions, for example, falls under either medial debt or weak debt. In both of these scenarios, the medial and the weak debt, you only pay zakat, liable to pay zakat on it once you receive it, and only on that years, not on the previous years. Is that clear? So basic, to simplify it, you know, the strong debt. Why is it called strong debt? Is because it's considered to be real tangible debt. So you have to pay zakat in the previous years. In the medial and the weak debt, you don't need to pay zakat in the previous years, even if you receive after 4 or 5 years. Okay, it doesn't matter. On the medial and the weak debt, you just pay zakat once you receive the money. So like typical case would be like a dowry. Woman receives a dowry money after 5-6 years of the marriage. She doesn't need to pay zakat in the previous 5 years. As soon as she receives it, she calculates zakat of that year only. Is that clear? Now, there's a few things though. There's a few things to remember though. That when it comes to debt, that the creditor only pays zakat if there is a likelihood chance that that person that you've lent money to, they will give you the money. Okay? If, for example, let's say you lent somebody £10,000 and they ran off with the money. Yes? They ran off with the money. You put a case against them. You've lost the case, for example. Or they ran off with the money and there's no way that you can receive that money back. That money is completely lost now. Yes? That is lost. Then your obligation of zakat is now dropped. Okay? So let me repeat this. What we just discussed about the creditor, that is the condition that the borrower or the one who owes you money acknowledges that he owes you money. There's a chance that he's going to give it to you. And in case if they refuse, then you can put a court case against them, or you can use some kind of threatening measures that you know that they're going to give you the money. Then you have to give zakat, okay? But if, for example, the person's lost the money, he's basically run off with the money, for instance, and there's no way that you can retrieve the money, and now you have lost total hope that you're going to get that money back, then in that case, your obligation of zakat is now dropped. You don't need to pay zakat on it. Because, why? Is because what was one of the conditions of zakat is ownership. What's happened now? No ownership now. But there's no ownership, there's no zakat. But what if, for example, let's say after so many years later, let's say, hypothetical scenario, this person went on Jamaat, for example, and he changed himself and he says, you know what, I remember 10 years ago, I stole £10,000 and I need to give that money back. And then he comes anonymously saying, here's the £10,000 that you're owed. What does he have to do now? Does he need to pay zakat in the previous years? No, only on that years now. Because he lost hope, didn't he? That's why. Okay, now, let's finish this off now. I don't know how many slides, I've got so many slides left. What do you want to do then? Do you want to end with this, or because this might take another half an hour? Or do you want to do like a Q&A session?
Okay, I think we got most of the gist of it.
Yeah? What about the rest of you? Okay, so what we'll do is, basically I've just already explained this. Acknowledge the debt or denies the debt. So zakat is levied on the debt by the creditor, and the creditor is absolved from his responsibilities. Basically what I just already explained. Now, so this is some general advice. I think this slide is important. Now, general advice, note the date when you become Sahib Nisab. So first of all, note the date and the time. Okay? Secondly, fluctuation of the amount throughout the year does not affect your zakat anniversary. Your zakat anniversary is determined by the lunar calendar, so you then deduct 2.5% of your zakat. So basically, well, like I mentioned about first of Ramadan. This process continues until your wealth falls below the nisab level or have lost all of your wealth. Okay? So if, for example, let's say that if it falls below the nisab level or you've completely lost it, then your zakat anniversary will then renew. So if you haven't paid your zakat that year, then that remains outstanding. Now this is another thing as well now. When we talked about debt, there's also a debt of zakat as well. Okay? So let's say, for example, let's say last year, now is the year 2024. Let's say 2023, your first Ramadan is your zakat, but you have not paid that zakat yet. So it's due, isn't it now? So when it comes to calculating zakat this year, right, you know that zakat that you owed last year, in the previous year, Are you going to include that in the calculation or not? No, you won't. That's deductible. So that becomes like also a debt that is deducted. Understood? That is a debt now that is deducted, right? Because that is zakat, that's outstanding payment. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, let's say you had £3,000. Okay, last year you had £3,000 on the 1st of Ramadan. You have to calculate zakat. How much is your zakat on £3,000? 150. Yes, £25 per. No, yeah, no, 150. 75. Sorry, my mistake. 75. Okay, right. So £25 per 1,000. So that's £75. Okay. Now you need to pay £75. You've not paid your zakat yet. Okay. Now let's say you've got that same £3,000 this year now. So if you got £3,000, how much are you going to calculate zakat now? So remember, you had £3,000 last year. You had to pay £75. Yes, you have not paid your zakat yet. Now it's 2024, 1st of Ramadan. Okay. So now, when you're going to calculate zakat on £3,000, how are you going to do it? No. Because how much of debt do you have of £3,000? £75. Why? Because that £75 is for last year's, isn't it? So how much zakat are you going to calculate now from that £3,000? 2,000 minus that 75. So 3,000 minus 75, what are you left with? Sorry, 2,000? 2,925, exactly. So you're going to now calculate zakat of this year's from 2,925, not 3,000. Why? Because that £75 is last year's zakat debt. You're going to pay that anyway. Does that make sense? A lot of people don't understand this. So this is the mistake that I still have to calculate the 3,000. No, you don't. Because now you have to take that £75 away because that's last year's zakat, isn't it? Which you need to pay anyway, right? So that's sorted for life. So you calculate on 2,925. So wherever the zakat, wherever 2.5% of that is, then you calculate zakat of that. Now let me complicate it. Let's say 2025, inshallah we all live. You had that same £3,000 and you have not paid zakat yet of 2023 and 2024. Yes? So you have £75 from £3,000. This year you've got 2.5% from 2,925. Yes? Wherever the amount is, it's probably about £60 or something like that. You still got that debt. Now, when it comes to £3,000 2025, you will exclude £60 and £75 if it works out for them. I'm not sure how much it works out, okay? Because remember each year that when you calculate your zakat and you're not paid your zakat, that is a debt. That is a debt. So that's considered debt, that will be excluded. Yes, so you basically reduce or you deduct the previous year's zakat due that's on you. That is considered to be a debt. So that will be deducted every single year so long as the zakat is due upon you. Is that clear? So again, let me give you the simple example. 2023, £3,000 your zakat. You pay £75. You have not paid that £75 yet. Now it's 2024 Ramadan, 1st of Ramadan. So what you do from the £3,000, deduct £75, you're left with 2,925. You calculate zakat now 2,925. And likewise the same year every single year. Is that clear? Easiest way is each and every year's zakat payment that is due upon you, that is a debt, you have to deduct that when you're calculating. G.
So I wasn't aware of this. So
that's what I said, nobody's aware of this.
So I've been paying like the same every time. So that's okay as well, isn't it? Or is that am I get penalised for paying extra?
No. If you pay extra, I'm sure that you paid your zakat every year, so it's not an issue. This is the case that where a person missed paying their zakat previously. So remember, when you missed paying your zakat, that's like a debt now to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that debt now is also going to be deducted. Okay, right? That also is going to be deducted because that needs to be paid of zakat. That's the reason why. So if, for example, you're paying extra, then what the extra will do, that will be considered nafil sadaqah. That's all. So there's no penalizing. You're penalized if you don't pay it. But if you pay extra, you get extra reward. Yeah? Is that clear? Now, recipients of zakat, let's quickly fly through this. Sorry, I'm going to fly through there. I don't know why I got that slide there. Okay, recipients of zakat. This is basically the Quranic verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlines who you need to give zakat to, okay, right? So this is the Quranic verse. And these are the main things to remember. Tamleek. So when it comes, so this is now the rules related to you giving zakat to the recipient. So when it comes to giving zakat to the recipient, there are conditions for fulfillment of zakat payable to the recipient. Number one is, we're going clockwise. Okay, let's start with the green box. Tamleek. Transfer of complete ownership from the donor to the individual recipient, whether to himself or to his wakala. Wakala means agent, okay? Like for example, let's say paying it to, now charity organizations, they represent you. Charity organizations, they represent you, they don't represent the poor, right? So when you give zakat to them, they are now representing you to give the money. So long as you made the intention that this is my zakat money and they're giving the receipt, they don't need to make the intention that this is zakat, because you've already made the intention already. Well, they need to ensure that because this is zakat, this is spent in the right way, that's all. Charity organization, that's what they do anyways. That's why they ask you, is there zakat or lillah, whatever. So when it's zakat, they know this is for the poor. If it's lillah, sadaqah, they know, okay, they can spend it to constructing a masjid or something, for example. Okay, so ownership. Niyyah, number two is niyyah. The yellow box is the intention to be made when giving zakat to the recipient or to his agent. Intention is valid until the recipient utilizes the asset. Now let's say, for example, you come across a poor Muslim. You say, you know what, I've got zakat money, I must just give it to him. Yes, you got money. But you forgot to make the intention. You gave the money to him, you walked and they think, oh, that's my zakat money. Can you make the intention now? You can make the intention so long as the money stays with them and they've not used it. So once they've used it, now you can't make the intention, you have to give your zakat again. Alright? But that's why, so the easiest way what you do is that when you're giving your money to the charity organization, you specify this is zakat money. They give you the receipt, that's sufficient. Now, number three is a Muslim. Obviously, zakat cannot be given to a non-Muslim. It has to be a Muslim because it's ibadat, isn't it? Now, nafli sadaqah can be given to non-Muslims. Because the Prophet ﷺ said it, tasaddiq ala ahli adyani kulliha. Give sadaqah to every religious, upon every religion. So whether it be a Christian, whether it be a Jew, whether it be an atheist, or whatever, nafli sadaqah, optional charity given to them is permissible. Right? Farz sadaqah, zakat, you can't. When it comes to sadaqatul fitr, there's difference of opinions. Okay, right? I've written a whole detailed fatwa on this. It's on our website. That can non-Muslims receive sadaqatul fitr? It's on our JK Fatwa website. You can refer to that. Of course, I'm promoting JK Fatwa as well. Okay, so we have a lot of all these queries there. Okay, sorry about that. Anyways, yeah. So nafli sadaqah you can give to them. Zakat you cannot give to them, and this is by consensus as far as I'm aware. According to all the four madhabs, you cannot give zakat to a non-Muslim, as far as I'm aware. And nafli sadaqah, according to all four madhabs, you can give it to non-Muslims. And finally, poor, the poor, with the exception of amilin, all those recipients who do not possess assets in fixed or liquid equivalent or more than the nisab. So this is basically what you call a poor individual. And you know, there's a lot of discussion about about giving zakat to a poor person, a poor individual. How do you identify a poor person, back home? I think, you know, the best advice I give is that don't just go by the person's statement themselves. A lot of people, some family members come to you, oh, I've got this person, I've come across this person's poor, and he's saying, give me zakat money. I'll give you one piece of advice, and since this is recorded, don't go by the individual saying that I am poor, therefore give me zakat. Okay? Before you do that, you need to first investigate. So if, for example, you have a family member who's saying that, look, there's this poor person living in this particular village, Pakistan or Bangladesh, right? So we need to give zakat. Before you even do that, first ask, investigate. How do you know that they're eligible for zakat? Okay? How do you know that? Have the ulamas and scholars have mentioned that they're eligible for zakat? So you need what you call, you need reference. You need a reference from an individual to say that this family, particular family, they are poor and they're eligible for zakat. Number one. So reference. Number two is looking at their living condition. You yourself go visit them and you look at their living condition. Now, how would you know that whether the living condition they're poor or not? One way you can do this is that number one is the neighbors themselves, the society themselves, they testify that this person is a very poor person. So you're going by the testimony of the neighbors. Okay? That's number way. Or another way to look at it is that by you visiting, you yourself assess the living standards in that community. And if you know that their living standard is very low compared to the average person, then you can know that they are poor. These are the practical advice they usually give. So remember, so when it comes to giving zakat to a poor family back home, you have one or two things. Your first thing is you have to investigate. Now, how do you investigate? You get some testimonies, reliable testimony. Let's say a reliable charity organization or a reliable family member who knows the masail of zakat, who's aware of the masail, or an alim or a scholar were to give to testify that this is a poor family, they are eligible for zakat. They've assessed the conditions, number one. Or number two, one way is that you go visit the family yourself. And this is probably the best advice I would give. Go visit the family yourself and you assess the situation. What's their living standard compared to the average person living standard in that society? Okay? And whether other people generally testify to the fact that this person is eligible for zakat. After doing all of this, then you decide whether you can give zakat to them or not. But never ever go by the individual statement themselves. They say that, oh, I'm poor, therefore give me zakat. Do not do that. Okay? Because remember, this is the case of farz, isn't it? Yes? So that's why, so this is just general advice I would give. This is also just general condition of, now, eligibility of zakat. Now those who are eligible, those who are non-eligible. Meaning siblings, relatives, students and friends and neighbors, they are eligible for zakat, provided that they're poor. So when it comes to family relatives, nephews and nieces, brothers and sisters, if you have, let's say, a poor brother back home, a poor sister back home, you can give them zakat. Alright? Those are non-eligible descendants, ascendants, Ahl Bayt, the family of Ja'far, Aqil, and they are like the Sayyids, and welfare projects. You can't give zakat to welfare projects. Okay? Note, if someone gave zakat to a person assuming he was eligible and he was poor, but later discovered that he was non-eligible, rich, then your zakat is fulfilled. So let's say you've done your investigation and then you assume that this person was poor. You gave him zakat. Later on you begin to realize that he was a fraudster. He was a rich person, but you genuinely investigated that you thought that this person was poor. You did everything what you could. And then he turned out to become rich, then your zakat is fulfilled now. Okay? Similar to the case that where you investigated direction of Qibla, but then you realized the Qibla direction was wrong, your salah is valid. So likewise in this particular case as well, okay? But this is only in the case if you did due diligence. If you did not do due diligence, or you just randomly gave zakat, then it won't be fulfilled.
So if you have somebody whose father's passed away, the young child, father passed away, but he's got a mother, is he entitled to zakat?
Sorry, say again, what's it?
Just say you got somebody whose father's passed away, he's not baligh. Baligh is, I'm presuming, 15, 16 years old.
Less than that. Yeah, baligh 15. Baligh is 15 years.
15 or 16, or 15?
And it depends, comes out to be before that.
Okay. His father's passed away, he's got a mother, is he entitled to a zakat?
Are you talking the child?
Yeah.
Yeah, provided he's not your
He's my relative.
He's your relative.
He's my relative. His father passed away.
Yeah.
When he's still 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And he's got a mother.
Mm-hmm.
But is he entitled to zakat?
Yeah, so you're basically asking the question that, let's say you have a relative whose father's passed away.
It's my niece.
Niece. Your niece, yeah, that's a niece, yeah. So giving zakat to poor nieces, poor nephews is permissible. Giving zakat to your siblings is also permissible, provided that they're poor. Right? So again, it's not the fact that because he lost his father, it's the fact that because if he's poor as well. Because let's say hypothetical scenario, let's say,
He's not really poor because his mother, she does work.
okay, that's what I'm saying. So if she's working, so let's take your scenario. Let's say you have a relative, father's passed away, and the mother, and they have a child. Let's say the child, about 10 years old, for instance, okay, right? Now, this child is your nephew, okay, your nephew. Can you give zakat to them? Now, if the mother is working and she's got a lot of money and she's providing for the child, obviously, then you can't give zakat to that child. But if, for example, the woman, she has no other income, she's very poor, right? And she's relying on other donations, or she has money but is just enough to fulfill essentials. She doesn't have no savings or nothing. She doesn't have any additional assets whatsoever, right? Everything that she has just within her basic needs. Then you can give them zakat.
But then you can go back to the reference of the £350 if they have a £350 savings.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I said. They don't have saving, nothing like that. So if they do have saving and all that, then because they'll have to give zakat then, don't they? That's it. So look at all the conditions at the same time. So if they fulfill the conditions of poverty, then yes, otherwise no. That's why this slide here, okay, this slide clarifies everything. Okay. Okay, now having said that, these are just some common questions that people ask. I'll just display them on the slide. So if anybody wants to know the answer to these questions, they're here. So there's question 1 and 2. Then you have question 3 and 4. You can just read them for yourself. And then you have question 5 and 6. Is that question 5 and 6? Yes. Is zakat compulsory on wealth and zakat compulsory on credit card and so on? So they're basically simple answers. And then I have questions 7 and 8. Oh, sorry. So that's questions. What question is this? Sorry. For that's 5 and 6. Yes. That's question 5 and 6. And then you have question 7 and 8. These are common questions that people ask. Just give them straightforward answers, so you can look at them inshallah on the final recording. Jazakumullah khair, and we'll probably draw this session to an end now because it's quite late for everyone, and Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
So I hope that was very useful and very beneficial. I can